Hi everyone, #1 Marmaduke fan here with an art book review. Let's get some important details out of the way first. Hi everyone, I'm #1 Marmaduke fan, and I am a fake Zelda geek. I have not even finished Breath of the Wild. I have not even finished A Link to the Past. What if Zelda was a girl? Yeah, sorry, internet. I guess I've got to give you my Zelda true fan card back, but. I do love the Legend of Zelda franchise. I asked for a lot of Zelda manga and Zelda books for my birthday. I'm not playing video games until I finish my comic, and then I'm probably coming right back to Zelda and a bunch of other stuff. I'll use the Let's Plays to advertise. James Smith, Wannabe Gladiator, just made a Twitter account for it. Follow at Jane and Akira for updates on my comic. But even though I'm not playing video games, I reserve the right to look at video game art books because there's lots of inspiration in them, and this is a particularly good art book where I think this would be worth getting for an artist, even if you're not primarily a Zelda geek. One of the main reasons is what's nice about it is it's so freaking honking huge that they get into a lot of things that other art books don't get into. Most art books tend to focus on like the nice polished illustrations, like they put on the box art and magazine covers. And this actually shows you quite a lot of NPC character art, location art, props. So many artists just have to design props, basically. And kind of the beautiful thing about the massiveness of this game franchise is like all of the great artists who would have been Michelangelo's or Leonardo da Vinci's. Well, they're not in art museums these days. They're clearly working for the comics industry and the video game industry. So if you like good old classical, exciting, vibrant art, that's the place to go to look for that kind of work. You can't really find it in the museums anymore, the academies. Number two, you get like lots of great ideas about what looking at the creative process kind of helps you look at your own creative process, I think. And one of the big ideas I think about the Zelda franchise is Nintendo and the artists often look back at their history, and Zelda is full of these great little bits and pieces, and then they'll grab some of those bits and pieces and rework it. Like you might use masks in one game. So they grab that idea, you use masks, and then they build a game around the whole concept of using masks, Majora's Mask, right? So they recycle lots of ideas, but they have so many good ideas that they can be recycled in fresh and interesting ways over and over again. And Zelda's really good at listening to its fans and taking criticism. One of the special things about Breath of the Wild is it's a very open-ended game. After several entries in the franchise were criticized for being too linear and too handholdy. And the main illustrator, Takumi Wada, I think he just had like god-tier brilliant moment in advertising this game. So he's not a concept artist. He was brought on late in development to illustrate the characters once the concepts had been pretty well defined, to help sell gamers on the idea of this game. And I think he just lived up to the challenge admirably. So the whole first part of the book is all about Takumi Wada. The big middle part of the book is all of the other artists and basically every kind of little piece of art you could imagine, even like little funny doodles where they're just like, what if one of the monsters wore a pot on his head in a little doodle scrawl? That kind of great stuff. And the last part is all kind of like history nerd stuff where they're like explaining all of the lore and the meanings of the different castles. I'm mostly interested in the artistic stuff since I'm not playing video games as much anymore, but great buy for Zelda nerds, excellent buy for artists. So flipping to this, the promotional image for Zelda Breath of the Wild is one of the most brilliant pieces of advertising I've seen. Now, I don't have confirmation that this is a direct inspiration, but I am 99.99% sure that Wada's illustration for Breath of the Wild was inspired by Wander Above the Sea of Fog by Caspar David Friedrich. Google that. He was a romantic. That painting in particular is one of the most famous of the romantic paintings, and especially when you see like the rough sketch for it in contrast to the later sketch, the idea that he's borrowing the composition seems to be even more obvious in his rough sketch. So what's brilliant about this is the Romantics were interested in the power of nature and almost kind of like the spiritual grandeur of nature. It's a whole idea of like spirituality and depth and finding yourself and appreciating the transcendent value of beauty in the world that I feel has kind of been lost in the postmodern age. But that's a really important thing for adventure stories. So Wada, I want to make sure I'm getting his name Yeah, WADA with a D. WADA has the problem of I've got to sell gamers on the idea that this is a big, expansive world you want to explore. I want to promise them the romance of adventure. He looks at a romantic to get a solid composition idea for an image that evokes romance. I think it's just like a beautiful symbol of how video game. I don't like the idea that video games are art, because that generally means people want to overanalyze video games and turn them into like this cerebral, what do games tell us about postmodern philosophy? Let's discuss. No, but in the sense that games do provide these very deep, meaningful experiences in a way that art used to. And art still does, but the fact that he took such direct inspiration from the Romantics, I think, is just kind of a beautiful example of how art evolves. Art doesn't stay the same all the time. 200 years ago, painting was the vibrant, successful art form. In our age, we've kind of moved. Maybe it's more like a cathedral. So in kind of like the 1800s, art was more defined by individuals and individual vision. But a cathedral was designed by hundreds and thousands of people over time, contributing all kinds of different artworks to many different pieces of it. And a video game is literally, especially a AAA one, is this massive experience with all sorts of details to the world, where dozens and dozens and dozens of artists all contribute their talents to creating a rich and immersive world. So that's a great illustration, great idea. He obviously has like a cool painterly style. So when I tell people, if you want to be painterly, lean into it. He's a good example of that. Another, I'm almost positive this is a nod to Akira, because Link's got a motorcycle. That's so cool. All right, so jumping ahead, it then transitions to actual concept art and development. And I just love this guy. He's got the smart aleck smile and the little floof on his hat. I want this guy to get his own series. That's great. And I love how things like, what if Link was in the future with a motorcycle? Or like an initial, maybe kind of a dumb idea, but then later they keep the idea of him still having a motorcycle in the sort of more medieval fantasy world. They've been floating the idea of a futuristic Link for literally since the 80s. So I just like how in the concept art development process, there's a lot of breaking down, going back to the drawing board and trying a few different things. And that's being echoed in the art department, who want to create a fresh look for everything, and the game design department, who want to create a fresh feel and not rely on just like the pattern of what they've always been doing. I also like kind of the what ifs or what could have beens of these, where, there's dresses that are more inspired by 80s Zelda, maybe a little bit more inspired by Tetra or Twilight Princess, maybe more realistic court wear, plain outfits, maybe a bit more Victorian style outfit. Like the fact that they're starting from square one gives them all of these different avenues where they could be taking it. And tragically, maybe some of these great designs get left on the cutting room floor, but I just like seeing that process. You also see how the other interesting thing about concept art is seeing how they start with a general theme, and that could go in a few different directions. So they might like to start with the theme of big, strong Goron warrior, some kind of Zoro warrior with a spear. Will he be a big, strong dude, or will he be a little cute little girl with it? And they'll have notes like emphasize her youth by having the spear taller than her. That's great. They were maybe going to have a Kokiri or a Sheikah as a champion, but then, things get reworked and things get scratched. That's really fascinating to me. The other neat thing about this from a character design perspective is details in the design are there for a deliberate reason. So maybe one school of character design thought is simple, 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 especially if you're an animator, because you don't want to animate a billion little details. Or you could maybe add some more details to make the character look a little bit more rich, a little bit more unique, but then it could get messy. So what I like about this isn't a hyper simplified design style, but little details within the design are considered, like the clasp that his sash buckles into. This is his hair, but they wanted to shape the hair so it evoked the idea of shoulder pads and shoulder armor, because he's a big, strong warrior guy. So they want everything about him to feel like a big, strong warrior guy, even the hair on his shoulders. That's great. Jumping ahead, I even like things like the monsters are scary, but they're also kind of oddly cute and oddly likable. For the little bit I did play, I remember sneaking up on one of these bokoblins and being scared because I didn't have a sword, and then grabbing his sword because I was sneaky, and then he freaked out. And they're fun to fight because even though they're trying to kill you, they're not they wouldn't like terrify a little kid, and you almost kind of feel sorry for some of them. Like some of them, it seems like you could grab a beer with some of these monsters. Jumping ahead, like there's also a great sense of humor to the Zelda world. Like they have these masks for Link, and they're obviously terrible. So the fact that the monsters fall for it and think you're a monster, this is great. It's like there's almost like a childlike, dumb fairy tale quality to this, but you believe it because the humor of it kind of is so warm that it kind of wraps you up into the world itself. I love this. So, lead artist of Enemies, Takafumi Kiyuchi, mentions Jomun pottery, I think, really ancient, like almost Stone Age Japanese pottery as an inspiration for these guys, where if you turn it upside down, you can kind of see the pot shape there. That's great because he's drawing from Japanese culture, but he's drawing from a part of Japanese culture that maybe a lot of Japanese students aren't even that familiar with. And to everyone, it kind of evokes the idea of an ancient society. Create a bad guy that looks ancient. Okay, I'll look at ancient pottery for inspiration. That's great. Like if you've got a fictional world that is even remotely like our world at all, it's a little bit like medieval Europe. Then if you draw from real world cultures and civilizations, it makes sense that a fictional group of people might have similar art or design ideas to real peoples within our world. That was fantastic. I don't know why I marked this. Maybe it was just, I don't know. Maybe I just marked it because that's where I left off reading. But then it kind of transitions into talking about, all the little details that go into atmosphere. Oh yeah, I know I marked this. So it's got a teeny tiny little doodle of Ganon holding the castle in his hand. And then 5 spikes surrounding it. So you don't instantly look at that and think hand. But the fact that they're curling around it almost evokes that powerful idea visually, even without the literal version of Ganondorf literally holding Hyrule Castle in his hand. That's great. And I did like seeing the itty bitty little like initial doodles, like 2 seconds on the back of a handkerchief doodles. I also like the really close connection between the game design aspect of it and the art design aspect of it. So from a game design perspective, if you're wandering around this big country, you want something that tells the player what that is. Oh, look, a giant horse off in the distance. I bet I can get a horse there. And then you run up to it, and then the artist has to figure out like the details of the horse, like what gives it kind of like a medieval folk vibe. That's just great. This is one of the things I love about this game is there's clearly such a great communication between the individual artists, Quiet Cuddles, and oh, good grief, get in here. The interviews. What did I say? There wasn't. Hi, Cuddles. All right, there were just a few interesting little comments in the interviews. I'm not going to try to dig them up, but they do talk a little bit about like Satoru Takizawa talks a bit about trying to create a sense of atmosphere in the game world, which is something that comes across in the illustrations, but something they wanted to come across in the actual game. Like when things get kind of quiet or a little misty right before it starts to rain. Takumi Wada jokes about how when he first started drawing Link, he was working on Skyward Sword, which means he's used to drawing right-handed Link, so he has this funny crack. Let's see here. The truth is, I joined the Zelda team for Skyward Sword, so I've been drawing right-handed Links this whole time. It is very important to me that everyone loves right-handed Link as much as any other Link. Laughs. Heresy! But I forgive you, Takumi Wada. You're a great illustrator. Eiji Onuma talks a lot about like as kind of the producer. He talks about the kind of like the bigger vision of trying to break down what Zelda is and forget what we know about Zelda. So, excellent game. The part of it I've played so far, I've really been immersed with. I will return to it. I'm going to finish that comic. This is a fantastic art book. It'll take you probably like a few months if you just want to read everything and absorb everything. I'll probably finish my comic, finish Breath of the Wild, and then read all this and play Breath of the Wild again. But that's it. Number one Marmaduke fan, top tier art book, lots of great prop work, NPC character work. It's almost like Peter Jackson, J.R.R. Tolkien level, like developing not just one culture, but like 5 or 6 different cultures, each with their own personality, history, and flair. So excellent. There was a beautiful comment in one of the interviews too about how literally looking at an art book was a prompt, I think for the art director that prompted him to want to get into game design. All right, hi Cuddles. Say goodbye to everyone, Cuddles. Number one Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Cuddles loves you. Bye-bye.